Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 27th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the DDA's Self-Directed Services Informational Session. On the panel today, we have Christy Colbra, Statewide Director of Self-Directed Services, and Leslie Thompson, Director of Programs. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar, by computer and phone. And if you look at the panel interface on your right labeled audio, you could click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. We are recording the webinar and posting the session on YouTube and the DDA website. Today's PowerPoint has been uploaded as an attachment and is available for you to download from the webinar panel box. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel. We will be accepting questions, however, the team will review them and use for a future FAQ. So now I'd like to introduce Christy Colbra. Hi, Christy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Really happy to have you all here today for our first introduction to self-directed services. This presentation is designed for people who are considering self-direction and for people who are currently self-directing or supporting someone too. As Donna mentioned, my name is Christy Colbreth. I'm the DDA statewide coordinator of self-directed services. Really excited to be with you today. As she mentioned, we will be accepting questions, so please keep them coming, but we will answer those at a later date. We can go to the next slide, Donna. Our agenda today, in our agenda today, we will cover the delivery models for our DDA waiver programs. We will talk about what self-direction is and how to choose it. We will review self-direction roles and responsibilities. Then we'll review person-centered planning and budgeting in self-direction. Next, we'll go over the onboarding of financial management and counseling service providers, or FMCS. And we will also review individual and family-directed goods and services, also known as IFDGS. And finally, we'll review some resources that are available. Next slide. In our DDA waiver services, there are two service delivery models. The first is traditional services. With the traditional model, services are provided by various DDA certified or licensed community providers. And in that model, the provider assumes all responsibilities as the employer of record. In our self-directed services model, the participant or their designated representative assumes employer and budget authority as the employer of record. Additionally, this model promotes personal choice and control over the delivery of services and the budget. It's important to note that both of these models ensure that the person is in the driver's seat of their plan. Next slide. Choosing to self-direct has a specific path. The first step in that path is to begin creating a person-centered plan. The next step is to develop a budget that is individualized for the person. And then the third step is to implement that plan and budget. The implementation looks like hiring employees and vendors to provide the services that were authorized in the PCP. Sorry, Donna, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. When you're choosing to self-direct, it's important to make an informed choice. So with that, we have provided the DDA's Guide to Services, and that includes all of our services in both models for anyone to review. It's also important to note that the timelines for transitioning to the different models might be a little bit different, simply because in self-direction, there are a few more requirements that need to be provided in order to begin self-directing. And we'll review those requirements in our next slide. Next slide. The requirements for self-direction are listed here on this slide. It is first important to have a finalized and DDA-approved person-centered plan. A participant agreement and a family and staff form are also required to begin self-directing, and we will review those forms in more detail later on in this presentation, and those links are provided to those forms here on this slide. Also, in order to begin self-directing, both the person who is self-directing and employees and vendors must be onboarded with the Financial Management and Counseling Services Provider, or FMCS. Next slide. So what is self-direction? Self-directing expands choice and control over the services received, giving the person the most decision-making authority over their services. The person is the employer of record, holding the federal identification number for their employees. People decide what they want to achieve, how they want to live their lives, what supports they need, and what will meet their needs. Next slide. You can self-direct some of DDA's services. You have employer authority with some of the services you self-direct, and budget authority with all the services you self-direct. Employer authority is managing your staff. This includes hiring, training, scheduling, and firing people if needed. Budget authority is making choices about how you spend the money in your budget. This includes choosing the goods and services you want and who is paid to provide them. Now we're going to review the team and their specific roles in self-direction. So in the team, there is obviously the person who's directing their self-directed services, their coordinator of community service, or CCS, their financial management and counseling services provider, or FMCS, a support broker if they choose to hire one, and any employees, providers, vendors, and contractors that are hired by the person, and any other that is chosen by the person. We've included on this slide a self-directed services handbook that goes into more detail on the roles of each of these people in the team. Next slide. We're going to first review the role of the participant, the person who is self-directing, and kind of go into depth on what that employer and budget authority means. The person develops their vision and helps to figure out how to achieve what they want through the person-centered planning process. This includes figuring out the types of services and frequency of those services. The person also develops, with support of their team, a self-directed budget for services authorized in their person-centered plan based on their yearly allocated funds. The person uses allocated funds responsibly to achieve what is written in the person-centered plan. The person makes decisions on the people they hire or the providers that can coach and mentor in making hiring and purchasing decisions to put the person-centered plan into action. The person reviews budget expenses on a regular basis to be sure that their needs can be met for the length of the person-centered plan. They also interview, hire, train, manage, evaluate, and if necessary, dismiss employees, vendors, and contractors as the official employer of record. And finally, the person schedules and participates in person-centered plan review meetings as needed to be sure needs are being met. Next slide. Now we'll review the role of the Coordinator of Community Services within Self-Direction. The Coordinator of Community Services, or CCS, acts as an advocate for the participant and also assists with identifying resources and providers for some services. The CCS creates the person-centered plan within the LTSS Maryland system, then works to develop the plan with the person and their team. The CCS will conduct quarterly monitoring meetings to ensure that the participant is satisfied with their services and that the participant's needs are met. CCSs assist with the development of the person-centered plan. They assist with ensuring people's health and safety needs are met. They assist in the development of the annual budget to be submitted for approval. And they assist with information and assistance related to support broker and FMCS options. CCSs also monitor that services are being delivered in accordance with the person-centered plan and approved annual budget. And they monitor that people are satisfied with the services that they are receiving. Next slide. Now we'll review the role of the support broker. For most people, a support broker is not a required position. It's an optional service that they can choose to have. Support brokers provide employer-related information and assistance for a person in support of self-direction to make informed decisions related to management of their services and budget. Support brokers can also assist people or their designated representatives with the human resources, employer-related functions necessary for successful self-direction. This includes an initial introductory orientation related to the employer of record, Department of Labor, and applicable federal, state, and local employment requirements. Support brokers may assist in the development of staff policies, procedures, and schedules, and in recruiting new employees and vendors. Support brokers can also coach in recruitment, advertising, and interviewing staff. Support brokers are always and can always be an active member of the participant's team in PCP meetings as desired. And support brokers must ensure that they keep their required training and certifications up to date, including their support broker training, first aid, and CPR certifications. Now we'll review the role of the Financial Management and Counseling Service Provider, or FMCS. The FMCS assists the participant or legally authorized representative by verifying employee requirements and certifications, conducting background checks on employees, managing the funds from the person's budget, creating accounting and expense reports for the team to review, and they make payments to employees and vendors at the direction of the person, both operating a payroll system for employees and sending out checks and other payments to vendors. Next slide. Employees, providers, vendors, and contractors have a unique role in the team as well. They provide the services based on the schedule of the person and at the direction of the person who is self-directing. They must maintain their current training and certifications that are required both by our waiver and by their employer, the person who is self-directing. They must always complete an initial background check as required by the waiver, but the employer might require additional background checks. That is up to the person who is self-directing. And they secure periodic updates needed by the FMCS regarding any possible changes to the employee's employment status. Next slide. We're going to pivot a little bit and discuss person-centered planning. This particular slide is a timeline of person-centered planning that is not directly related to only self-direction, but it does lead into the next step of self-direction. So let's go through that really quickly. Person-centered planning begins with a pre-planning process. At that time, the person and their CCS identify the members of their team, they gather resources as needed, and they set the agenda for the PCP process. Next, they begin the person-centered planning. The person and their team identify the goals of the person, they assess needs and the services needed, and they evaluate natural supports and services that are already available to the person. Next is plan development. Based on the person's choices, the CCS builds a detailed service authorization into LTSS Maryland and submits that plan in LTSS Maryland to the DDA. Finally, the DDA reviews and authorizes that plan in LTSS Maryland, which establishes the funding allocation. With that allocation, the person and their team create an individualized budget. And that's our next slide. So let's go over to budget planning. Your DDA self-directed budget is where you decide how you will use your DDA funding allocation. Your CCS, working with your identified team members, will help you develop a budget to pay for the supports you have identified in your person-centered plan. The budget must be clear and meet the requirements of the DDA. The self-directed services budget that's developed is just a starting point. It can change over time to allow for some changes. You may request from your CCS a copy of the approved budget and PCP that you develop. The budget guides the way the FMCS pays the bills, so it must be accurate and kept up to date. The person self-directing may select team members to assist them in developing the budget, but the CCS and the person submit it to the FMCS once it's completed. Next slide. Now we're going to discuss the required documents for self-direction. The Self-Directed Services Participant Agreement documents both the participants' request for assistance in self-directing their services and the team members' agreement to assist with support of the specific work or task described in the agreement. This is a required document for anyone who is self-directing. The participant agreement shows the support needed to self-direct successfully with 3 options. Option 1, the person will manage their self-direction responsibilities themselves. Option 2, the person will choose another to manage their self-direction responsibilities. This is called designating a representative. Option 3, the person will choose team members to support them in certain responsibilities, as listed on the agreement. Next slide. The DDA Self-Directed Services Family of Staff form is used by all participants who are self-directing. Participants use this to inform their team, coordinator of community service, FMCS provider, and the DDA if they are hiring a relative to provide an approved DDA self-directed service. Relatives are defined as a natural or adoptive parent, step-parent, child, stepchild, or sibling who is not also a legal guardian or legally responsible person. The family and staff form is also a required document for self-direction. It allows a person to hire family members if desired by noting one of three options. Option 1, I do not want to hire a relative. So even if you're not hiring a relative, this form must be completed with option 1 chosen. Option 2, I want to hire a relative as my support broker. Option 3, I want to hire a relative to be my direct support staff. If hiring a family member, the team will need to explain why and how the relative will work for the person. It's also important to note that hiring a relative as a direct support staff will require the person to hire an impartial support broker. Next slide. Now we're going to review onboarding with the financial management and counseling services provider. People self-directing their services choose the FMCS provider that works best for them. In Maryland, there are 3 companies that provide the DDA's FMCS services: GT Independence, Public Partnerships LLC, and the ARC Central Chesapeake region. For those considering self-directing right now, the ARC Central Chesapeake region is not currently accepting new referrals. People who are self-directing should follow the onboarding process listed on the chosen FMCS webpage. And those web pages are all 3 available on this slide. Next slide. Individual and family directed goods and services. Individual and family directed goods and services are services, equipment, activities, or supplies that support a person to self-direct. They come in 3 different categories. The first is recruitment and advertising, which is up to $500 of dedicated funding for staff recruitment and advertising. The second is day-to-day administrative supports. And the third is other goods and services as listed in the guidance. And we've provided the IFDGS guidance, quick guide, and a previous webinar on those services on this slide as a resource. Next slide. Depending on the IFDGS needed, there are different ways to request it. So we'll go through those different ways. For recruitment and advertising, a request must be made in the person-centered plan detailed service authorization. For day-to-day administrator, the service must be included in the PCP. That can be done either through the annual PCP process or through a revised PCP. In both cases, the service must connect to an outcome for the person in their person-centered plan. For an annual plan, the person and their team can include that service in the self-directed services budget sheet. For a revised PCP, the team will need to complete a budget modification to add those funding to their budget. If doing a revised plan, the revision must reflect day-to-day administrator that's being requested when that revised plan is begun. For other goods and services, a request must be used using the IFDGS request form, and that form is available on the slide deck right here. It is a smart sheet that is pretty interactive. It's a way to sort of work with your team to request that form and get that over to the DDA for review. Next slide. Listed all of the linked guidance that we reference here in today's webinar right here. So we have our Self-Directed Services Handbook and Guide to Services, as well as the guidance for our family and staff and individual and family directed goods and services. So those guidances are available to you on that slide. We've also offered additional tools. We have our DDA provider search, which includes provider agencies that you can search and ask if they would support you as a vendor, or you can find support brokers on that provider search. And then we have a listing of our FMCS agencies here. So as you're choosing to self-direct, you could choose an FMCS that is accepting referrals. Next slide. On the DDA Self-Directed Services webpage, we have several forms and other sheets that are available. So we've got those linked here, both the self-directed budget sheet and budget modification, as well as the participant agreement and the family and staff form. And here we've also included the individual and family directed goods and services request form here. Next slide. Thank you so much. We're really happy to see about 200 people of you on the call today. We hope that this webinar was informative. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we won't be answering questions today, but we will be taking your questions and reviewing those and providing answers to those at a later date. And so please continue in the next 2 or 3 minutes to just add any additional questions that you have. Other than that, I think we can probably leave the webinar open so that people can get their final questions in until about 1:35. But thank you so much for joining us today. Please reach out to us if you have any person-specific questions or concerns that you need the DDA to connect with you on. Otherwise, please include your questions here. Thanks so much. I see a couple of questions for those who are still online regarding access to the presentation. There is a download in the presentation today in your GoToWebinar link. Donna, can you maybe explain how to download it?
Yeah, there's a section, you open up the panel, there's a section called handouts, and you should see the PDF in the handout section. If you have any trouble, you can email me at donna.will@maryland.gov, and I'll make sure that you get the PowerPoint PDF. It'll be in a PDF format.
So much. I see some really great questions, so we really look forward to getting those answers out to you soon. Well, I think we can close it out. I think we haven't gotten one in a couple of minutes.
Ready to close out? Thank you for attending today and posting questions. We value your feedback and will review and respond to frequently asked questions by a regular updating of the DDA FAQ document. Thank you for your dedication to our DD community. We hope you will join us for our next webinar.